Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose. I'm at Thundergrunt Bob on Twitter. And right now, Jamie Nash is going to introduce himself.
Hey there, I'm Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter and the writer of a couple Save the Cat books. Save the Cat Writes for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet workbook. You can find me on Twitter. Do we do that now? I think we do.
Yeah.
At Jamie_Nash, because everybody will turn it off right after that. So
that's it. I'm done with it.
Yeah. Jimmy.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. My Twitter handle is at Jimmy R. George.
Okay. And today we are going to talk about a now 10-year-old movie. Once again, me lamenting the passage of time. We're going to talk about 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy.
I cannot believe it's 9 years old. Oh my gosh.
I know. Because we were literally talking about this on the day of the release of the third movie. Before we get into our talking points, let's go around and just give a short summary on, I don't know, your reaction to this movie originally, your original reaction to this movie. Jamie, you fell asleep during it or something, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then we'll move on to our talking points. So let's start out, since we started with Jamie first, let's start out with Jimmy this time.
Okay. So this is, for this podcast, it was only the second time I've seen this movie. I didn't even rewatch. I was intimidated by the Endgame rewatch of the whole MCU before that. It's just too many. And I also, for Guardians 2 and 3, I didn't revisit the first one before I just stepped back into that world. But so it was only the second time I've seen it. So it was almost like watching it for the first time again. And so I love this movie. I think this is going to be a love fest again, I'm sure, and that's fine. I think there's a ton of craft that we're not going to talk about. There's a bunch of dialogue repetition and reversal. Great. I think we could do an entire podcast just on the comedy writing techniques. Like, we're not talking comedy at all on these talking points that we have laid out. And there's so many comedy writing techniques. Like, there's running gags. I bet you if we did the 11 types of onion jokes, we would find one of each of those. There's comic obsessions, which I originally was going to talk about, but took off. There's a lot of comedy techniques in this. And I think it's weirdly feels, Bob, you've said before that Guardians feels like it's not an MCU movie, but it's weird.
I'll cover that in my section.
Yeah. For me, I didn't mean to steal it.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
For me, it's weirdly both. Like, I felt watching it. I thought watching it this time, I was going to be like, this is nothing like the rest of the MCU. Jumping back in 9 years later, I felt like it's distinctly MCU. Like, there's so much Thanos. But at the same time, I think if you just watch this and never saw another MCU, unlike a lot of the other ones where you'd be lost, I feel like this movie does a good job of telling its own contained story with its own world building that's like specific to what's happening in this story, right? Like the Xandarians and the Kree. That's very specifically two worlds. It's like I debated doing what we talked about on Willow, which was like, how, only a couple warring factions and only a couple, it does a lot of the things that Willow does really well that makes it a satisfying fantasy story. There's a lot of fantasy paint here, that genre stuff that we're not going to talk about.
It's more fantasy than superhero almost.
Yeah. So so I love the movie, but oddly, I think there's a lot of great stuff that you can learn that we're not going to talk about because there's so much other teaching material here and instructive stuff. So anyway, there's my thoughts on Guardians.
We never talk about everything, or else the show would be 5 hours long.
Yeah, I tried to, and then I always cut it back and leave it's too much.
Right. Jamie.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't really remember when I saw this movie. Like, I can't remember, because this was past the time I went to see all the press screenings. I'm sure, but it was still a time when I saw every movie that came out right away, immediately. So I must have saw it opening weekend. My big thing with this movie is I have the hugest screenwriter man crush on James Gunn the whole way. Like he is the guy I wanted to be. I think I've since passed that, and I'm like completely different in some ways. But coming up as a screenwriter, everything he did from Troma on, I mean Troma too. I wanted to do Troma kind of stuff. I wanted to do Slither kind of stuff. I wanted to do Scooby-Doo kind of stuff. I wanted to do Super. I mean, everything he did. Yeah. Everything he did, maybe not the specials. I didn't care about that. But everything he did, I wanted to do.
Humanity? Do you remember that?
Maybe not PG porn. PG porn's the kind of thing I would do, though, honestly.
PG porn's pretty funny.
Yeah, it is, honestly. So I can't tell you how much James Gunn was the guy I wanted to be. Like the tone, the mixing kind of irreverent with stuff, but also you always got a sense that if given the chance, kind of like Scooby-Doo, kind of like eventually Guardians, he would bring something that was, for the masses to you. I don't know. You just could sense it, even though he was doing like Tromeo and, kind of stuff, or Troma stuff. You could sense that he was going to do it. And then eventually he did it. It like all came together with Guardians, I think, where you got to direct and write, something like this. So, and then in some ways, I was like, he beat me to it or something. Not that I was in a race. I mean, I'm still not I haven't gotten to his first ring of his ladder in some ways.
You're like Salieri to his Amadeus. You're like, damn you.
In some ways, to me, I graduated from James Gunn at this point. I didn't necessarily feel like he was my guy or anything like, because I think the masses had him at this point, and he was for the masses. So this movie was that in that way bittersweet for me. It was the culmination of everything I knew he would eventually do, but at the same time, I was like, oh no, now the world totally has him. He's the world's person.
You're a hipster. You were like, I liked him before he was cool.
Absolutely. So in some ways, I did have like a chip on my shoulder about this movie. I was a little contrarian about it in some ways, but it's kind of like the ultimate movie like that I'd like to do. I was even rewatching it this time to almost like find a thing to pick on about it in some ways, and I don't do this later, so I'll mention it here. And I will say that it does get a little it's not really super plot driven. It has these meandering parts that just kind of, let's hang out at the bar kind of parts or something.
But they're filled with conflict.
Yeah,
like it's very much like the Suicide Squad in that way.
Interpersonal conflict and stuff like that. So it has these parts where it's just like, hey, let's just have the characters go at it. But yeah, it's so good. And I think talking about our points a second ago, the Marvel Universe, the definitive, I think looking at it, it's sort of influenced a lot of what was to come in the Marvel Universe. And I will say maybe not for the better in some ways. I think the only knock I have is James Gunn did this thing where it's almost whimsical, where, everybody's kind of laughing through the threats. Nothing's that scary. And I think that's great for this movie, but I think it doesn't have to be in almost every other movie. I mean, there's exceptions. I'm not sure that Black Panther has that tone and stuff. But I do think his comedy and his whimsicalness, even though Avengers had that too. I mean, that was a Joss Whedon.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
I think he even amped it up a little more. I think he pushed it even a little further. I think I might even say that the Star Wars movies that came afterwards, like that, maybe that's why we got that silly, like, hey, I'm making a phone call fight that happened in Rise of the Sky. I think this movie was very influential.
How dare you mention that movie?
Yeah. Well, I think it might have tried to take some lessons. And this is what I'm saying. Yeah. Those movies might not need to take these lessons.
No, right. No, I agree.
Maybe leave that to James Gunn and you do your thing.
I think.
Anyway,
I was going to say, like, to add to what you're saying, Jamie, I think just an argument could be made that Guardians and Deadpool, both those two movies, which right. I love. Right. I love both those movies, but it made everything else worse because money men decided they wanted more of that.
Right. Make it more like Deadpool. Make it more like Guardians.
Right. And those things should have stayed the aberration of what it is. And instead they made it everything. It's like, no, stop. Don't make that everything.
It's like what Tarantino did to the crime genre in the 90s.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Or
everything
Matrix, you could say Matrix
yeah.
and stuff. Yeah,
Yep.
it always
The
happens. You know?
superhero version of that.
They
Yeah.
literally re-edited Suicide Squad to be Deadpool and ruin the entire movie. The first one.
Yeah.
But okay, so real quick, for me, Jamie stole really my thing, because I was a James Gunn guy too from the beginning. Like I Romeo and Juliet and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I like literally love James Gunn so much. I used to participate in all of his MySpace Q&As. Like I was that much of a geek. I talked to James Gunn on MySpace back in the day. Like,
yeah, I'm not old enough to remember MySpace, but
you're older than me.
No.
Anyway, though, yeah, I mean, like, I would say that I'm still a James Gunn guy. Like, I'm still like, I don't have a chip on my shoulder that you have, Jamie, and you know, I understand what you're saying though. But like, this movie to me was like, I was celebrating the culmination of everything I knew the guy was, and so this movie was like a little bit of a cultural moment for me in filmmaking, because I was like, that's the dude I love, you know,
Right.
like that's the guy I love.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, he had done a few things. I mean, I was excited when Dawn of the Dead came out and all that stuff. Like, I knew why it was good. You know what I mean? But you know, like I admit I'm a James Gunn super fan. So you can hear it on our The Suicide Squad episode.
Yeah,
I think that's the only other Gunn we've done, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I love this movie. I think that, you know, I think you could say that maybe after tonight, because I'm going to go see the third one. The first two Guardian movies are literally my top two MCU movies. If I had to, easily, 2 is easily my favorite MCU movie. But and I'm sure the third one will work its way into the top 5 just because, you know. But yeah, like I don't consider these movies, or this one even, that much of an MCU because they're James Gunn movies to me. You know what I mean? That's the only thing I meant, Jimmy. This one is the only one that has any world building with Thanos and stuff. The other two, haven't seen the third one, but I've heard that everyone's celebrating the fact that it's not like that. So I'm assuming that's not there. And the second one doesn't have any of that stuff. So this trilogy is divorced the most from all of that.
Contained to its own.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Contained to its own thing, besides of them being in other movies and stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't, in my mind's eye, I always view them as separate. You know, so I do get a little annoyed online when everyone's like, this is I'm getting tired of MCU movies, or this is an MCU movie. I'm like, it's not really though. Like, it's not, I don't know. But I understand you can make that argument with the other movies too. Like if they have Final Cut and everything, but they're doing all that different world building where this feels like something else that they added that to. Like Ronan doesn't have to be working for Thanos. You could cut that out, right?
Like just shoehorned in, you know, like crowbarred in.
I feel like also James Gunn had enough power after this where he could say, I'm not doing that stuff anymore. Like, you know what I mean?
Like as a weird example, like my sister loves Guardians of the Galaxy. My sisters never saw Star Wars or read my comic books. They didn't know who Captain America was even. You know what I mean? They had no idea.
Same. Yeah.
But she saw Guardians of the Galaxy, and to this, she's like going to see the next one because she can't wait to see it. Because it has the music and the fun and the comedy, and it's kind of goofy. So I don't know. It's while she does see the other Marvel movies, I bet she doesn't remember them. I bet if I said, "Do you remember when? Which one was that?" And I don't know, but she remembers the Guardians of the Galaxy movie.
It's Jamie. It's the same thing for my mom. If I mention Guardians of the Galaxy, she instantly smiles. Like, and she doesn't care about this stuff that much, but she loves these movies. You know, it struck a chord with people that were outside that space. I think, you know.
Yes.
They've definitely reached past it, but
super quick, the box office, just because we're here.
Oh, yeah, I was about to ask you. So
okay.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if it was on the talking points or not today.
No.
So, but since I'm staring at it, worldwide it made $770 million. The domestic was 333. To set the stage, that was third. Now it's kind of disappointing of what finished ahead of it in retrospect in a weird sort of way. So 2014, do you have any memory of what could have been 2014 box office?
I'm so bad with release
made
schedule.
more than that? that made more.
I know
than
that. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, there are two things that it was third place, so two things made more, and
I don't know.
they're both sort of disappointing in a weird sort of way.
Jurassic World,
not Jurassic World. Yeah, it's the date thing that's hard, obviously.
Yeah, like I can't remember.
Because who knows? 2015, 2012.
Fantastic
who cares?
Beasts.
No,
it's not 10 years. Okay,
okay. I'll give it to you.
I don't know.
It was Transformers: Age of Extinction made $1 billion. That was number one.
I did see that one.
Okay. And by the way, most of it came international, 858 international. So that's the big difference. Whereas Guardians made a huge domestic number. It's almost split domestic, a little bit more international. But number two was The Hobbit, The Battle of Five Armies.
Oh, shit.
At $940 million.
It made that much money? I had no idea.
Yeah, The Hobbit, which is kind of thought of as a flop in our minds.
It's
right?
not, though. Yeah.
It's a $1 billion movie. You know what I mean? It's like one of the hugest movies of all time. If you listed like top 50 movies, Transformers: Age of Extinction and The Hobbit are probably on it. And they're ones at least me, I don't give it two thoughts about it. You know?
I've never seen either one.
I've seen both. Age of Extinction has the best ending ever when Optimus Prime he flies off into space to try to kill God. So there you go. That's why it made $1 billion.
No, sandwiched on the other end are three movies. One, The Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 1. I get that.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
By that.
Yeah.
But then this one is a little bit of a surprise, but I guess I saw this in the theater. Maleficent is number 5.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the one that hit me. Oh, well, maybe this is one of the good ones. I get them all confused. X-Men: Days of Future Past. Was that the good one? I
hate that franchise, but that's one of the better ones. Yes.
Okay.
For me, I'm a bit of a negative Nelly on that.
Was that the one where they kind of rebooted a little bit? Was it the second one of the reboot?
Was the reboot, and then the second one.
Well, no, First Class.
After First Class.
First Class was when they were young. Days of Future Past is when they go back in time.
Oh no, I don't think I like that one too much. I like the one before it.
That's the only Bryan Singer one that I like. Is Days of Future Past. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really remember too well then. And then just to complete the list, another MCU, Captain America: Winter Soldier, 714. So this made more than Winter Soldier.
That made more than a Captain America movie. That's an established character and everything.
Yeah.
In a bigger way than the Guardians were,
Probably because in other countries worldwide, people don't want to watch a movie called Captain
America.
Well, here's the weird thing about that. I was thinking the exact same thing. Captain America made more money internationally than Guardians.
Whoa.
And the split is much better domestic. Captain America only made $202 million domestically. I'm sorry, 259 million domestically. Anyway, that surprised me too. I was thinking the exact same thing, and then
it's
I
also so different. Oh my god!
It's also a more like straight-laced, stuffier, subject matter than Guardians is a much more of a party type movie.
And it is a sequel. The Avengers had come out and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's riding the wave at that point.
Yeah.
So then 8, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I was thinking the other day, those Planet of the Apes movies are kind of forgotten, but really good. Like,
I consider the third one a masterpiece. Like, I really do. I love it so much.
To me, those movies are, pretty quality for what we got in the last
It's a great
20
trilogy.
years.
It's just not talked about at all.
It's not talked about. Nobody really cared. It just, they kind of came and went in a weird sort of way. I mean, they made a ton of money. They made us $710 million. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Interstellar round out your top 10.
Damn. Okay.
There you go.
Jamie, I love your enthusiasm for listing box office
movies.
It's my favorite part. It's like what I love.
Just so everyone knows, we never ask for that, and Jamie just does it. And it's awesome.
No,
I don't know.
It's great. I love it. I want it every show.
It's kind of like the thing I grew up talking about that people don't really seem to care about too much anymore because of the way streaming and stuff. But I used to love going back and figuring out remember this list, and now I've forgotten a lot of them. So that's
in the 90s it was such a hard line thing, I remember Will Smith being on a talk show celebrating Independence Day becoming the biggest box office movie and stuff, and that was like a huge deal.
It was big bragging rights,
right? Like
yeah.
it like it was something people talked about.
And now I just find it. I mean, it doesn't even seem that long ago in my history, but just revisiting Transformers: Age of Extinction and The Hobbit as 1 and 2 kind of boggles my mind, to be honest. So it's like amazing.
Those beloved classics, Age of Extinction and The Hobbit.
Yeah, I really just want to do a podcast where we go over the lists of box office. We could change to that. That's all I care about.
We'll just change up the format, and it can just
you could probably do an okay podcast if you talked about every one of them, like a little bit.
You pick a year and you go through.
Yeah. Like it's not the worst. It's not the worst idea.
Somebody probably already does it.
They probably,
to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, so Jamie, this is a really interesting question. Who wrote this shit?
Yeah. So James Gunn was one of the writers on it. And it was based on the comic book, of course, is it Dan Abnett? Is that the guy's name?
Yeah, that's how you pronounce it, right?
Okay. And Nicole Perlman, who was the first writer on. I wanted to talk a little bit about the development of this.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting. So Nicole Perlman, who I first became aware of because she had a Blacklist script about the Challenger called Challenger. That kind of broke her career. So she was kind of like a sci-fi and space nerd, so to speak. And Challenger broke her career, the Blacklist being the most popular unproduced scripts. We've talked about it in the past of the year. And they kind of do a survey of agents and producers, and they pick the scripts. And that was one of them. And if you get on that list, it kind of does boost your career a bit, especially if you're an unknown with no credits.
What episode did we talk at length about that?
The Menu?
I think
I think it was one that had it might have been The Menu.
It was The Menu because The Menu was, and we talked about like the old Blacklist versus.
I'm looking right now to check it. Yep. So if you're interested in Jamie and Jimmy talking at length about this, The Menu is the one to check out.
I thought it was Cocaine Bear, but
did we do Cocaine Bear and I forgot?
We did. No, I'm just
Jamie's just making shit up now.
So it was that Super Mario episode we did.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, Nicole Perlman, she kind of hit with the Challenger script. Never made. That movie was never made. I think there may have been movies made like it since then, but I don't think it was hers. At least she doesn't have credit in IMDb. But then she went into this Marvel program. I don't have the name of it in front of me here. It's funny. I read the interview last night. It was like some kind of Marvel fellowship kind of program. It was almost like a paid internship where they picked 5 writers. They invited 5 writers to come on board and comb through like old Marvel properties that they wanted to write. Okay. They were like, you pick, you go through them. And they had a list. Here are some weird ones. Like they didn't put Thor on the list or something, or Doctor Strange. They put things like Guardians of the Galaxy on the list. And she picked that. And what she says is everybody was quite surprised anybody would pick that. They were like, oh, that's weird. But she was a big sci-fi person, and it just appealed. She said she really wasn't a Marvel person at all, but she was a sci-fi person. So she was like, oh, this is space and stuff. I can do this. She wrote a couple drafts of that and developed within this, what, like I say, they call a paid internship. I don't know how exactly, when I hear paid internship, I'm like, well, it's WGA, right? It's like Writers Guild. So it's more than an internship. If they were writing scripts, they would have been getting a lot more than an intern.
Maybe the language the article was using to conceptualize it was wrong.
It was kind of the language she used, to be honest.
Okay.
But I don't know. Maybe she was just being humble about it, because I almost think it was more like writer's roomy kind of WGA kind of. She would have had to gotten paid minimum script fees, which are in the, I'm not looking at it right now, but it's probably like anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000 for the script or something, and then drafts are going to be even $50,000 more and stuff like that. Pretty good intern money if you could make it.
Just a bit.
Yeah, and anyway, so she wrote that, and then they got James Gunn to write to direct it. They wanted she said they always expected to have a writer director. Now what she said in the interview was that The characters were picked by her. The set pieces were all pretty much the same. Here's one interesting thing that she said. She was the one that picked Thanos. And she said she knew the movie. Yes. And she said she knew the movie was real when they put Thanos at the end of Thor, I think. I think it was one of those movies. And she was like, oh, they're using, my villain in their other one to tease.
Wow.
Yeah. So if that is to be believed, in some ways,
she's responsible for the whole Infinity Saga.
Yeah, just kind of randomly through writing this thing. So that shows you kind of how they end a lot of this stuff in the beginning.
Yeah.
If it's to be believed, sometimes this stuff has different memories. Like I'm sure if you ask Feige, he's like, no, it's Thanos from the beginning. Before Iron Man was made, I had Thanos on board. Or something.
Yeah.
No, they literally have admitted that's not true though. Like they've made. Remember in Thor Ragnarok, they literally admit that the thing in the throne room in Thor isn't real. The glove. So they're literally making a joke of that. It's not. Yeah. Like they changed it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So anyway, the interesting thing about the development of this, James Gunn came on board. There was a little bit of spiciness from James Gunn after the credits came out. James Gunn kind of felt like in interviews that he should have gotten sole credit on the screenplay, and he didn't. He claimed like some of the things he said he brought the humor, he brought the heart, he brought the mixtape.
Yeah, the music.
There were a lot of different things he brought to it. That said, I just wanted to talk briefly about WGA arbitration. So we're in a strike now. So
I was going to say it's topical.
I'm not allowed to talk about it. No. So WGA arbitration, because
scandalous, Jamie.
Yeah,
a lot of people don't understand this, and it's really important to watching movies. So if you're a movie watcher, to understand how it works a little bit. So here's how it works, and I've been through it twice.
I was going to ask you, yeah.
Yeah, and one time I lost credit, so I can kind of tell you what that's like.
Killer.
And so here's how it works. Here's how it works. Generally speaking, after the script is done, the producers write what they think the credit should be. So they'll write, let's say, for example, they wrote James Gunn. They were like, we think James Gunn should get the credit. We write James Gunn. All the writers get a notification, and it's like, you have, I can't remember what it is, 5 days to appeal. Okay. If you do not think this is true. So anybody that worked on it at all gets to see that, and they get to send an email or whatever they do and officially appeal. So I think what happens in a lot of movies. So let's say, I think this happens in the Star Wars movies a lot. I think when the old ones, George Lucas, right? I think he kind of was cool with everybody getting credit. So when he saw, I'm trying to think of who was the woman that wrote Empire Strikes Back that died. I can't think of her name. But when he sees her name, he just signs off on it. He doesn't say, no, I don't, he writes it in. So I think there's a whole thing where it's like, wink, wink, let's let James Gunn get the credit. Everybody really wants that. I think that happens sometimes. I think it happens where everybody gets together and says, nobody appeal this. By the way, this could be
Lee Brackett.
So this reminds me, side note, this is like the urban legend behind the Good Will Hunting writing credit, and like who really wrote that movie, based on like, would it make a good marketing campaign if it was just them? Based on the reality of the
William
writing.
Goldman be on it
like
too,
William Goldman did a draft supposedly, like, but if we take his name off of there, it's a better story and it makes more money. It
is. It did happen like that, right?
Now that said, well, I think that does happen on occasion from somebody like a George Lucas who has plenty of money. Okay, I think most writers, number one, want that credit. So I think they'll turn on each other quick. I think it'll become Hunger Games in a good way. I mean, they deserve the credit. So if you said, hey, we'd like James to have this credit. No, I'm Nicole Perlman. This is going to break my career, dude.
Right.
No way.
Exactly.
No way. So
this is a big break. Yeah.
And it should. And I'd be the same. But bigger than that, you only get residuals if you get a credit.
There it is.
Oh,
that's the big one. And by the way, on a movie like this, like one time John August was talking about, he was just saying what he gets for residuals. So let me just show you what this is. Like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like he was listing his residuals. He was like, he got like $2 million from residuals from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory over the course of a few years. So Nicole Perlman's not going to be like, I'll let James have $2 million. I don't need that, you know, or 5 million or 10 or whatever it's going to be over the course of its lifetime. So I don't think that happens too much, but I do think it happens in the case of like a George Lucas or something. He's like, I'm okay. You can have a credit.
So, Jamie, are you saying it's almost maybe this wasn't just about like the creative fight over who is like money? It was
no,
like
it's money.
It's totally money. Okay,
absolutely. So the time I lost it, the biggest thing I was upset with, I didn't care too much about the credit, and I won't say what movie, but I wanted the money. I mean, I need that money. It's for me, you know, and for me, it's not $1 million, but it might be literally losing that credit might have lost me $150,000. So it's really important money wise for writers to get those when they happen. So anyway, so James kind of was like, oh, I didn't, you know, I wish shouldn't get credit. So here's how it works. So let's say either James and Nicole both got credit on the producer said they should both get credit, which is usually the way it goes. The producers usually don't like to take a side. They just put everybody on and say, you guys battle it out. You guys figure it out. So then let's say James raised his hand and said, wait a minute, I wrote this draft. It was me. She should not be on there. Okay. Which is kind of what happened to me. So it's very similar. It was like, Jamie Nash did not write this. I was the last writer in. It was a little different. It was more like if Nicole said James shouldn't be on it. But I was the last writer in. Somebody raised their hand and said, we wrote the first draft. That guy shouldn't be on it. He should not be on it. So they raised their hand. So then all the materials go to WGA Arbitration Committee, which is really a jury of your peers. So it's other WGA writers. They have to read through every single thing submitted as an official draft. And there's some kind of archaic rules. And this is the part I should have looked up before this because I can't remember the numbers. But generally, it's like on an original script, it's like you have to do 50% of the work, which is really hard to define. Because does that mean you rewrote the structure? You could have rewritten all the dialogue. It's hard. It's kind of like a little bit of a magic thing. So if you're doing a lot of structure stuff, if you're doing a lot of concept stuff, it's easy to figure out 50% of the work. Like the time I got taken off, I tell you what I rewrote. I rewrote all the dialogue, character arcs, and one complete character. And I was like, I think I did 50% of the work, I hope. But they said I didn't. They were like, nope, that's not enough. So, you know, it's hard to figure that out. So in this case, Nicole did do, from her own admission, the structure. She picked out the characters. I guess the MacGuffin was there. Thanos, the villain. It sounds like she did 50%. You know, it sounded like she did a big chunk. Now, there are different formulas for adaptations because now we're talking like, you know, if I came in on Spider-Man, obviously
you didn't create Spider-Man, right?
I didn't create Spider-Man. I didn't create the villains. I did create. So there's other numbers and they're harder to get credit. Honestly, it's harder. And there's also a rule about writer-directors that they have to do even more to get a credit or to knock somebody. So it means James did a lot of work on it. It just doesn't mean Nicole didn't do a lot of work on it. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So for James Gunn to even get writer credit on this property as a writer director, because almost all directors do some writing, and a lot of them do a lot of writing. So a lot of times when you see scripts, the director did take a pass at it, but they didn't get credit because they're writer directors, and you need to do a lot of work to get a writer director credit or writer credit if you're a writer director. So anyway, to make a long story short, it sounds like Nicole Perlman did a ton of work on it. James Gunn did a ton of work on it, and they got the right credits, in my guess. But he was a little.
I mean, just the fact that she won her side of it.
Yes,
that means she did enough.
Very telling. Very telling about her contribution to the material.
It went to a jury of the peers, and they both got credit. So that means they both did a lot of work.
Yep.
So anyway,
and it looks like in the end she did work for Marvel again with Captain Marvel, right?
Yep. She did. She She did. It's funny because her career, you'd almost expect her career to launch. Blacklist screenwriter, Guardians of the Galaxy, and she's had a great career so far, and I think she's got tons more. But since 2014, story by on Captain Marvel, story by on Pokemon, Detective Pikachu, and that's all for now. Everything else is shorts. So, but Captain Marvel, huge credit. Pokemon story by is a whole nother thing. I won't talk about this. We'll save that for another time. That's one that's even harder to understand. But I think the arbitration thing is important for even if you're not a writer, just to understand that as somebody who likes movies and how movie credits. There is a thing out there now. They signed in that there's some kind of additional writing credit, which they've always been fighting for, that doesn't carry residual weight, but at least gives you acknowledgement that you worked on the movie or something.
Right.
I think there's something like that coming. And one last thing, if you ever notice on like a Pixar movie or some animated movies, those tend not to be WGA. And that's why they have like 50 writers on them, because they don't have the same rules. They just list people, and it's all based on your contract, whether you get residuals or not. So that's why sometimes like Pixar movies have like 10 writers on them or something like that.
That's a whole other talk.
A whole other thing.
A whole other talk.
Yeah, I forgot we were, like the Nicole Perlman discourse. I remember back in the day, I forgot we would have to even address that. But then it's true. Like, you think about this movie, you think about James Gunn, sadly. Well, I think, Jamie, you've covered it before. You said writer-directors are who we associate everything with. We never think about co-writers and just writers.
The good thing is the industry recognizes them. It's more the public that doesn't.
That's what I'm saying, is the public.
For Nicole to even work on Guardians of the Galaxy, like, it's weird. There's like a taboo. Like, let's say her name got scrubbed from it. There's a little bit of a taboo from even mentioning you worked on it. It's kind of like looked at from your peers as being, a no-fly zone. Like, you shouldn't talk about the fact you did a draft or something.
If she didn't, yeah.
I've heard John August and Craig Mazin talk about that. By the way, when I work on something and get my name taken off, I talk about it all the time.
I know people who have like uncredited rewrites on Tron Legacy. Yes. A couple other big movies where
I think after 10 years go by, you're just part of the history of it or something. Like, I get, like, when they're doing press, you don't want to raise your hand. I worked on Spider-Man as well, or Spider-Man 3, But
you don't want to complicate the box office, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. It is a little confusing. But I think as years go by, it's interesting to hear, like, this writer did a draft and this writer did a draft, and they contribute. So I don't think it's taboo then, but just like when it actually comes out, you're not really supposed to be tweeting like the movie I wrote, and they're like, what you wrote that?
I'm resisting the urge to open up a whole non-Guardians conversation about the fact that most writers who are trying to break in don't realize that, like, basically every script gets rewritten by like multiple people, and the concept of you writing this script that's just yours with all your words, it's that doesn't happen.
No.
So
that's part of the discussion this week, right? Like, yes, the scripts were finished, but when you shoot things, you change things.
It's always
evolving. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
I'll give you even a weirder one that's related to this. I had a script that I rewrote from scratch, and I was reeling from the time my name got taken off. And by the way, in retrospect, I don't think this was a good decision, but I didn't challenge taking the original writers' names off, because I was like, no, I'm not going to be like that guy that took my name off.
Yeah.
But it probably cost me like $60,000 to do that, to be a nice guy. So the price of being a nice guy was about $60,000.
Oh my gosh.
And I knew that doing it, but I was like, I just can't. I can't bring myself to complain about it. And I might have lost. Who knows? But it happens.
On my end, I've been hired. I've had scripts that I optioned that then were completely stripped of my material, like 100%. And then I've been hired to rewrite other scripts that are in development. And then I did what you did. I was like, I don't want to be like that guy who took all my characters away and all my dialogue and all my moments. And that was a mistake. Like
Right.
I like silenced my own voice and why I was hired to be a nice guy. And that was a mistake.
Yeah.
I should have been the asshole who stripped all the material and rewrote it my own way. Yeah.
To give you an example too, the time I had my name removed, by the way, that script feels more like me than some of my other scripts feel like me, because I was the last writer. So I all my dialogue is on screen, all the things, all these little quirks, all the, I rearranged all the different scenes.
Probably a bit how Gunn feels about this, right? Like,
yeah, because it feels like, oh, that's totally me. It's my voice up there, because I redid all this stuff. But,
and I mean, going forward in what we've seen, it is his voice. Like I don't want to. I'm not trying to insult, diminish her in any way, but like he has made other movies and written other movies since, and I would say, watching this movie, it feels completely consistent with his voice.
But I'm glad ultimately that she got the credit.
Oh yeah, no, I'm totally glad about that.
I think she was the first woman on an MCU movie as well, as writing wise. I think that was a big deal as well.
That's sad.
God. Well, the MCU discussion, that's a different day. That's for a different time. We've done a lot of MCU movies. We have covered a lot of MCU, so enjoy that. It's probably not going to happen as much anymore, but enjoy it. We got all the big ones in.
No, I'm 7 movies behind right now.
7 movies.
7.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting how we're going to move on, but how that section, there's so much to talk about with arbitration that we didn't even talk about, like, really James Gunn and his, we kind of said it, I guess, during our little spiel at the beginning, but we didn't talk about James Gunn's like history that much at all in writing.
Its own story, yes.
Yeah.
Lots of texture to this.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. But let's get into it with the opening image. Who's this? This is Jimmy, I think, or
this was one of mine, and it kind of goes back to, it's something I noticed. There, the choices for the opening image, and in this case, I'm really talking about the opening sequence. It might not be.
I know what you mean.
How you define the opening image or opening sequence depends. I tend to write my opening images as sequences. Like I might do my opening image, and this is a Save the Cat term. So the 15 beats of the Save the Cat, the first one is the opening image, and you could. This is an example. Like let's say you're writing Jaws, you could say. I don't even know what the opening image of Jaws is. Is it just like the campground or something?
Open.
Yeah.
It's
or some people would just write like a campfire as my opening image, or people around the campfire being happy, and that shows the beach as a happy place. The way I tend to use the Save the Cat beat sheet, and there's no right or wrong to this, and different writers use it for different things. I'd write the whole opening sequence, like, I would write a little pencil thing in. At a party, a girl goes out swimming alone and gets killed by the shark. That'd be my opening image. So I kind of use it as the cold open. Mileage may vary. Do whatever you want. Whatever helps you write. But what I noticed was a lot of opening sequences, opening images, teaser, cold opens, whatever we want to call them. What they use is another thing in Save the Cat. And I think I brought this up in the horror thing one week. They actually set the shard of glass, and the shard of glass is the origin story of the flaw that the main character will overcome in their character arc. Okay. So in a lot of movies, the shard of glass, the origin story of the flaw, is never shown. But I've noticed that one technique that people do, especially when they do kind of like these little prelude stories, these kind of little things, it's kind of the shard of glass. They put the shard of glass in that scene. So a couple other ones that I think of, like one I use in my classes, I use Finding Nemo in my classes. It's one I use. That one, if you remember Finding Nemo, the teaser is his wife has a bunch of eggs she's just given birth to, and they're attacked, and all the eggs are like eaten except Nemo, and the wife's killed. So it's this horrible moment, but it sets up the flaw in the father, like overprotectiveness, right? This one is, it has Quill not holding his mom's hand, like in the moment of death, and all the weight of the death and the guilt between that, and then getting taken away, and all this stuff, all wrapped up into one little sequence that will actually be the big shard of glass, the thing deep within him that's causing him not to be happy or be whole or whatever, be fully him or whatever it is that you cause. And I just noticed it's a technique that this movie used that I figured I'd point out.
Yeah, that's good.
No, it's great. It comes full circle too, right?
Yep. Even some movies like I guess Midsommar, that was the one I brought up in the horror version.
It's a great example of it.
A lot of horror movies, or Megan even. Megan, when they had that little crash in the beginning, you could say that's the thing that causes.
You've called it the horror before the horror.
In those cases, a lot of times it's the horror before the horror. It's some horrific thing that happens that's not related necessarily to the supernatural or monster later on, but it's some horrific thing that happened in their past that sets them up as stuck, or stasis equals death in the setup.
Yeah.
Yep.
Totally explaining his arrested development and everything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. We wanted to talk about exposition on this one.
Yeah, we're gonna go fast and loose with it, right, Jamie?
Yeah. Because I think this movie has a ton of exposition to tell. I think some of it, I'd say it. This movie has a lot of influence from Star Wars in some ways, and I think Star Wars does a great job with exposition in the beginning as well. As much as you get the jokes like, George, you can write this stuff, but you can't say it, or whatever people say. But the one thing that Star Wars I always thought did is it's like, we're not going to explain the world. We're just going to throw it in motion and let you figure it out.
And let you,
Yep.
And you'll figure it out on the fly. So it's kind of this on the fly, on the move exposition that happens. That's because it would be easy to do like a movie that maybe didn't handle it great, like Ready Player One or something. Like,
yes.
Let's tell you about this whole world before we start the movie, And I think we talked about this. Right? It's been so long. How many?
We did that episode.
Third episode in 2018.
Yeah, but I think we might have. That was the last time I watched that movie or thought about that movie. But I think we even kind of said, or maybe I said, I would have rather this movie just cut that first 15 minutes and just started
and just let us get into it and just accept it for what it is.
Yeah. And this is true in this movie, even to the point there's characters with differing worlds and stuff that you could easily describe. The orb, you could see a lesser movie that says, before mankind, there were these stones and blah, blah, blah.
They put up that up front. Yes.
Yeah. It could be kind of a Lord of the Rings.
They kind of did that in the 80s a lot, where they would did that paragraph of text,
Yeah, well, just Lord of the Rings. I mean, Sauron built these rings and this, and each one went to the kingdoms and blah, blah, blah. And then they were lost. And now we don't know where they are and who knows. And then we start the movie.
I don't hate that all the time.
No.
Yeah.
It has
like Lord of the Rings. I like that.
I honestly, in my consulting, I often, when someone's trying to tell a fantasy as with as much world building as this, and suggest their version of the Lord of the Rings prologue, but at the same time, this movie does a good job proving that you don't have to do that. You can, with the right techniques.
When I was tracking the good bad, we'll talk about that later. But I was also, while I was doing it, I was like, I don't know the names of like 5 things that happened, and I was like, and the movie doesn't really even care to tell me, and I was like, that kind of that's what it felt like. I was like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Peter throws something. I'm like, what the hell is that
James Gunn
thing
isn't
called?
asking you to make a mental grimoire the way that. Yeah, like
it's more worried about character than it is.
In fantasy scripts that I read, man, I was really close to revisiting the Willow stuff that I talked about, because I read a lot of fantasy scripts that come across my desk, and there's too much of everything. So as a result, you can't remember anything or connect with anything. And to your point,
I love by the way, the Lord of the Rings prelude. I love it.
I wasn't trying to say you didn't. I was just
but to be honest, in spec scripts, I tend to always hate those preludes in spec scripts, just because they're never really that original. You know, it's like they open the book of this and we see flashes. And it's always kind of a little bit the same. And for something like a spec where you're really trying to like grab people by the throat right away, preludes, unless they're done in some really unique way, they're really hard to pull off on the page and make exciting. Whereas like you could imagine a scene with Peter Quill in the middle of finding the orb, like, and he puts on the headphones and stuff like that. And I'd be like leaning forward. I'm like, what the heck is this? You know, I'd be like, so anyway, but the preludes are a little bit harder to do that with. And I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just difficult. It's difficult to do with those kind of montagey narrative voiceover prelude kind of things. So here are some exposition techniques, and maybe you guys can help me plug in.
Yeah.
So the one I noticed here was something I like to call need to know basis. So you save the exposition until some character needs to know what it is. And usually it's the main character. Like sometimes it's not. Sometimes they need to know something from the main character. But the reason this is an advantage is because if the main character needs to know it, so do we. We're asking the same. We're like, why is this orb so important? You know, what's going on with this thing? Can you think of any examples?
And then like to bounce off of that,
well, the ring.
When you then deny that, there's immense power in the denial. When a character needs to know something and then they're denied that information, then it doubles our hunger as an audience to orient ourselves. Now we really want to know. And to your point, the mystery of the MacGuffin, the mystery of the orb, they have Peter asks, Yondu asks, Rocket asks, Drax asks. That over the course of the first hour, 4 different characters are denied the information about what this orb is. So it creates this extra like sense of importance about this information, and we're hungry, right? So then when that info dump that you described
at the collector,
it feels less like an info dump, and it's more like super satisfying because we've been denied it 4 times. So I thought that was
an orgasm of exposition.
I made an inappropriate sound effect there.
Yeah, I know that all worked out really great. It worked out great. No, but I did notice that while watching it too. I was like, you know, there is a lot of exposition along the way.
Yeah, throughout
the whole thing.
That was, when you described that technique, Jamie, that the orb was the first thing that came.
Yeah. I mean, there's some other techniques in this movie. There's so much exposition in this that you get a little bit of the good and bad, but it's all done pretty good. Because even in like the next scene with Ronan, he kind of is monologuing, right? And it's fine because it's shot and executed in such a way that it's fine. It's, you know, he's almost explaining his methods in order to do the next thing. But he is definitely like, you know, let me tell you my tale, you know, people.
Right, yeah, totally.
You know, my world was conquered.
We just have like Jamie perform Ronan for the rest of the episode.
It's like, you know, everybody hanging out with him is probably like, dude, we hear it every day. Okay, we don't need to hear it again.
What you're talking about with Roman too, that like I think he's probably gotten the most criticism for this movie, like the villain. I think the villain but I feel like that's only on paper. For me, in execution, like you said, Jamie, it works. You know what I mean? Like on paper, I get the criticism a little bit.
Well, I didn't even do a circus mirror exercise, but I think it's very crafted, like in opposite contrast to Peter, because Ronan is a joyless, humorless figure, and Peter is filled with joy and humor, and that dance off that we'll get to in the end, is bringing those 2 contrasts to a head.
The only thing Ronan can't comprehend is humor.
Right. If they had not crafted Ronan the way that they did, then that ending doesn't work.
There's even exposition for Ronan from Christopher Fairbanks. What's his name? The little alien guy.
I have that in a second. I'll bring that up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah,
Jamie brings up
there's a technique. Not totally related to this, but there's a technique talking about Ronan that we talked about in Galaxy Quest, where I personally, my theory on these kind of movies that are a little fun and funny and people laugh things off is you need your villain to be kind of serious and scary. Like they need to be pretty dangerous. You can't, if you make them too silly, then the whole thing's like silly, you know? So you need to make your Ronan and Thanos kind of the straight man in some weird way. So I think they sort of do that in this movie.
Jamie, the building it into narrative, how would you describe that?
Yeah. So building it into narrative, it's kind of like something I almost think that this is, it's a little bit need to know, but it's kind of like the Jurassic Park thing. Like, you know, hey, obviously these characters need to be introduced to this thing, this you know, cloning. How do we do that? It's part of the narrative. It's part of the progression of the characters that they would next fall into this expositional section.
I like
just
that
as part of the story. And the one example, and I think you're going to bring it up too, that clicked with me is the Usual Suspects moment.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's completely motivated in that scene to just learn as much about them as possible. And it's all organic. Like it doesn't feel like they're cheating. It feels like it's how it would happen in that moment,
Right.
you know?
And this scene has a couple of these even before that. Like there's
Just to be clear, you're talking about the scene where we see each Guardian, right? And
Yeah.
Police lineup. Yeah.
the police lineup scene. I'm just for people listening.
Like let's get their little backs. Let's get their
what's a bunch
record.
of a-holes. That scene.
And then they bury it with a joke, right? That's another part we talk about. An easy way to.
That was also like
exposition
the
feel
trailer.
LS.
If you guys don't remember, that was like literally used as the trailer. That
I barely remember that.
whole
That's
section was
awesome.
the trailer. Yeah,
That makes sense. And then even things like, you know, Rocket might be there, like, who's this target we're after, or something like that. And that you could put little bits of exposition in that too.
Mhm.
You know, there are little spots like that. Like if you're giving a mission to go after the orb, you can give a little taste of what the orb is, or something like that.
Right, like what it demands answers.
Yeah, and so all that's built into the narrative. You know, like I'd say a James Bond movie or Indiana Jones, like that classic exposition scene with the
here's your mission. Yes.
Here's your mission. It's built into the narrative. You have to have that. It's part of the story.
So it doesn't feel forced.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like you're just like, time out. Let's all talk about the arc. You know?
Zach Morris it.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be incredible.
Peter turns to the camera. Time out.
In a weird sort of way, probably James Gunn would probably make it work. But turn into the camera and talk about things. So another one we've talked about a lot is window characters and moments. And I can't remember when I notched this one while I was watching the movie. There was some specific spot. I was like, oh, it's kind of related to what we're talking about, but they're characters these are characters that know about as much as the audience does, that can ask questions.
Yes.
And moments where the audience is asking a question, but the characters are at the exact same time. And some of this stuff goes they all
work together. It's multiple
together.
Techniques piled on top of one another.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't remember who specifically I was thinking of when I saw this.
I mean, I definitely feel like all of the Guardians offer us windows into each other in a way that's really organic.
Right.
They all know so little about each other, and we don't either, that all their questions and, you know, feel organic, like you would be asking these questions about these characters to each other.
Rocket stands out for me for that, mostly because number one, he can talk, and number two, he's the most curious of why he's involved in things.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas, you know, I mean, like the others are curious, but he's the most functionally window for me.
Yeah, and he's the one who gathers info. Like he's got the most info about. He knows Drax's people's background. He knows Groot's people's background. He's like the intel guy.
He's kind of smarter than everybody too.
Even though his persona doesn't come off that way, he's got the street smarts.
Right.
Yeah.
No, there's another technique that I saw here that I put in every one of my scripts, and it's not a great, it's probably a bad technique, but I see it in every movie. But I saw it here and I was like, yeah, I do that every time. So whether it's negative, it just seems like a common trope at this point. But I call it the I share, you share moment.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's when Gamora tells her story and then he tells his story. And it happens a lot in romantic moments. It's like, I'm the way I am because of this sad thing happened. I'm the way I am because of this sad. And it's kind of like
I totally do that shit.
I do it in every romantic. It's like I haven't found the technique to get around it yet because every romantic movie does it or something, or every relationship movie does it. I do it in everything.
It kind of does happen in real life.
It does happen in real life.
So it's not like completely out there.
I have not found a better solution to it yet.
I like it.
I think with proper execution, I don't think it's a negative. I think that scene in this movie works really well.
Yes.
So
that's one of my favorite.
It's in probably every one of my scripts. I have one of those moments where it's like, I share, you share. I call it I share, you share. So anyway, that was another one.
You didn't put this on the list, and we'll get into the next one in a second. I don't want to skip over your next one, but Pope in the Pool. You want to describe that? Because I actually thought of one while Bob was talking about Rocket.
Good. So Pope in the Pool is a save the cat term, and it's it's one that I found in comedy is what I found in this is a comedy thing. So I'll say just because Bob will like this, and I'm sure I brought this up before. It's like Naked Gun when two guys are talking, and in the background you have the fight going on or something.
Yeah.
And they're talking about something serious. So you're laughing, and they're talking about something kind of whatever that's important to the narrative, but isn't too exciting. But there's this huge fight going on in the background. So Pope in the Pool it's similar to that. Like as a kid, that's what I always thought of it as. Whenever I wrote something, I always wrote that scene into my thing because I was ripping off Airplane or Naked Gun. But Pope in the Pool is similar. There was some movie, I don't remember what it was called. I have to look this movie up one day.
We got to know the actual reference.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever watched it. He probably made it up.
Because I'm like, one of my notes, this needs a Pope in the Pool.
I've never heard you guys say Pope in the Pool before. I would have remembered that.
Yeah, we must have brought this up
definitely.
Before. Yeah. So
Bob, how do you not remember all 96 episodes?
Yeah. I'm sure.
I would remember Pope in the Pool though.
Yeah, so it's a term for.
Makes me think of Pope in the Pizza from SNL.
So Pope in the Pool there was a movie where there was a long expositional scene, and in the background the Pope was there, and he was in his little hat and this thing, and he takes it off, and he has this little bathing suit, and he dives in the pool, and just the whole time you're watching the Pope swim around in the pool, like doing handstands and stuff. I'm making that part up, but he's doing anyway. The Pope's doing something to the pool, so it takes this boring moment, but then puts something interesting in the background or something like that. And
to add spice and flavor to an ordinary expositional dump, right?
That's right.
So this movie, I'm sure if we really just focused for that technique, it's filled with this. But one that immediately came to mind when we were talking was when Rocket gets drunk, the fighting in the bar on that planet, and Rocket gets drunk, and we see that he's like in pain, from his and we finally learn like a little bit more about his background and his history while he's drunk, and they're breaking up an intergalactic bar fight, with intergalactic.
The
setting itself is a Pope in the Pool, right?
Yeah, right. No, that's like a classic Pope in the Pool because I even think for lack of a better technique, I think the classic exposition, like when people talk about exposition, they always bring up the Terminator thing. It's a car chase. They're in the middle of a car chase, and that's when Reese is delivering all the exposition.
Right. So and that is a Pope in the Pool.
And in a weird sort of way, that's a Pope in the Pool. Maybe it's a variation on Pope in the Pool. But the one you just described is like classic Pope in the Pool because it's not related to the A plot. It's just setting. It's really just setting, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the other one, it's like you're combining a plot and exposition, and you're just kind of delivering exposition while you're doing a plot. So, anyway, so the next one I had was use it as a character tactic. And it's funny, I didn't really have this I wrote these down as I was watching, and now I can't remember why I said it. So maybe you guys will have.
I've got three, and then Bob, I don't want to cut you off.
Let me hear your examples so I know what you mean exactly.
So I think this could be used in a multitude of ways, and I call this, and this I didn't come up with this term, but I don't know who came up with this term, but exposition is ammunition, where it's where we're in a situation that's filled with conflict, and the exposition that happens is either in defense, the person is delivering exposition in defense of themselves, or the person is using exposition as an assault, right? Like the information that they are delivering is to gain the upper hand in the power dynamic of the situation, right?
Right.
So the first one that comes to mind that sort of plays with what you described and what I described, Jamie, is in the orb heist, when Peter is interrupted and he's got the orb and Korath comes in. He says, "What is your name?" And Peter's like, "My name is Peter Quill, dude. Chill out." Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's a very simple way to, like, Peter is defending himself. And that is why the exposition comes out organically, right?
You could say he says he's Star-Lord to intimidate him, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, right?
It doesn't work,
yeah.
right.
But so the second one is, this is, I think, like a really good scene to learn from as far as like dumping exposition, which is the one that you referenced, Bob, where the buyer is, once the buyer learns that once the broker learns that Ronan is involved with the orb, he tries to push Peter out. And then all of this exposition is happening while Peter is trying to push his way back, keep his ground. And the broker is physically pushing him this entire time. And he's like, "I want no part of this transaction if Ronan is involved." Right. And Peter's like, whoa, who's Ronan? You know? And then the buyer's like, and the buyer tells all the backstory of Ronan and his motivation. So we learn all of praise.
It's also praise the killer.
It's praise of the killer. We get a praise of the killer, and we get to fully understand the villain's motives and agenda from another character who fears him in a situation that really is like about Peter just trying to get some money. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a really great example of exposition is ammunition, right? Like, that guy is trying to get Peter out, and it's coming out as information, as like a weapon, you know, get out of here. Like, this guy's too dangerous. So, and then the third one is a little bit simpler, but it's another example of that exposition coming out through conflict and tension, like you said, Jamie, which is when they're in handcuffs being dragged to their cells. You know, Groot is like, "I am Groot," and Peter's like, "Yeah, that's great. The first 89 times you said that. What is wrong with this thing?" And then Rocket explains like his that he doesn't have a vocabulary, you know, he can only say 3 words there in that, you know, in that order. And that's another way where the exposition comes out through conflict, and it's like ammunition, right? So yeah, anyway, I don't know what other ones you had. Did I cut you off of any of yours, Bob?
I didn't have it. I didn't write this down prior, so I didn't write any down. But I could. I mean, the one that sticks out to me is when they first meet Drax, and he's like trying to basically kill Peter. You know what I mean? There's a lot of tension in that scene, and I feel like we learn who Drax is naturally. Mm-hmm. I mean, Rocket does give exposition on Drax a bit later, but we get Drax of who he is as a
right there
in that whole tense scene
through tension,
where Peter's almost killed, right? Yeah.
And again, like, Peter is demanding answers as a defense mechanism, right? Like, so the exposition is very organic. It doesn't feel like they're forcing it down our throat.
It was interesting. I was going to bring up Praise of the Killer because in some ways, because these are all bad guys, they can all have Praise of the Killer. Like, you give a Rocket speech if you wanted to, or a Groot speech.
Yeah, there is a speech about Groot in the prison.
Yeah, so you can do kind of Praise of the Killer. And it reminds me of, like, when I was a kid, first started to write, I used to read a lot of books on writing, and I remember reading about exposition, but they said, like, one of the big ways to do exposition is to have other characters talk about your character or whatever, or talk about, you know, or this is more about learning about your character. But I think that speaks to Praise of the Killer. Like, if you can come up with, you know, scenarios where characters are giving warnings about characters.
Yep.
Characters are telling why they're never to trust them.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, never trust that guy. The one time he screwed me over because
the
of blah,
personal
blah, blah,
testimony.
Personal testimonies.
Yeah,
that's that, maybe Praise the Killer is like a subset of that personal testimony.
Yeah.
If you made a tree of it.
Yep. And it has a big vibe with like putting the team together too. Usually that happens, right? Like when somebody describes every team member that's coming into play, and this movie has that, but in an unconventional way.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's also why this movie, like we talked about earlier, how it doesn't feel totally like an MCU movie, or these movies don't. It also doesn't feel like a superhero movie because of what Jamie just said. You know what I mean? Like everyone's bad. It kind of feels way more like a sci-fi movie than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Superhero doesn't read everything we're talking about. Yeah, they're outlaws from space, and space people have different abilities. It doesn't feel superheroish. Widening POV, using main character transitions to new subplots.
Go for it, Bob.
Okay, I don't actually know what this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Bob's up next.
I'm up next.
So this is just something this is a note I give a lot for television.
Jamie wrote 2 books on this stuff to go on me. Like, come on.
Right. This is it was just so ambiguous. I was like, I'm just going to pass that back to you. So in TV, a lot of times when I work on stuff in TV, and even when I read scripts from people, and this is a technique that I've kind of honed in on for features in TV. If you have an ensemble cast, or if you want to tell like stories with lots of characters, I am a big fan of not jumping around willy-nilly. I think you should start with a POV. You should pick somebody, and this is just my own strategy. There are different people that do different things. But I think one good way, especially if you have a big ensemble like this, you start with a POV, and then you have reasons to jump to different POVs. You establish reasons to jump to different POVs. So in this case, we start with, Star-Lord, and, he's there. And then we don't jump to Yondu until he calls him up, right? And then we jump to Yondu. And then I think Yondu says something like, who's after this orb?
Yeah.
And then we jump to the next thing. So it's this weird, there's reasons to jump. Now, I will say they then jump back to Rocket, and there's not as much of a transition, but that reestablishes the setting in some ways. Like that's what they use that for. So in that one, it's a little bit willy-nilly. But I find that, especially in the beginning of a movie, if you can find reasons, and they're your own reasons, sometimes they can be storyteller reasons, like who would be the person that, boom, we jump to them. Sometimes it would be the hero would actually call that person. They'd bring them in, they'd introduce them. But that way you can kind of introduce people one at a time in a logical thing.
That's
and it's
good.
Not as confusing. Yeah, it's not as confusing as if you just
you're
jumped.
Organically motivating the introduction.
That's right. That's right. And I find a lot of people with ensembles, they literally just jump to the next thing. I mean, that's why this is kind of a transition technique, but it's kind of not. It's mixed with transitions.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
I never thought about it that way. I like it.
And it's so a lot of times I'll tell you when I see this, is somebody wants to write Game of Thrones, their own Game of Thrones. And it's just like, now we're at this castle. Now we're on a cloud. Now we're underneath the ground a million miles, and there's no reason or
there's no dialogue taking you to where your brain would go to the next person, right?
And because of that, you're trying to process how it's connected when it's not, right? Because
you're filling in gaps that aren't there.
Yeah. But if you give it a reason and you give it that transition and it makes sense, then the audience is like, okay, we're going to this new place. Where we get it. We get why we're going to the new place. And for a TV pilot, let's say from the second episode doesn't have to do that anymore necessarily. You could start from I don't care what you do with the second episode, but a TV pilot where you're introducing piece by piece by piece, I think it's better to build this kind of connected thing in this understanding way. I think it's a better way than just trying to remember all these different characters and setting.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's good.
So anyway, I saw that here and I was like, I will mention it because in movies, you don't see it as often, or it's a little different. But this movie does have a lot of characters and a lot of different players. You have Yondu, you have Ronan, you have all the Guardians who are going to all come into play. So there's all these different characters. So it's kind of like a TV show in that regard, where you have to get all these different plates spinning very early.
Now that you've described that, I can totally see how it's like each character takes us, like you said, it opens the world a little more, and we're in media res to this new character and their facet of the world, and then we're in media res of the next new character and their facet of the world. It does make all that expansion really smooth, and like
It does.
yes,
It does.
Yeah,
And
it's really good. Yeah,
the in media res, we kind of talked about that before, but it is interesting that this movie, and it gives it a very fast narrative, that we're always in the middle or toward the end of some story when we join the characters. It just makes the whole thing feel so much faster. The only time it has a slow start really is the very beginning. Is kind of, even though we are in the middle of it, it does kind of start from "come see your mom now," as opposed to already seeing mom. So and it works well that way.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I would never thought about that, Jamie.
Yeah, I like it. I want to look for it more often now.
It's a technique I use a lot, but it's something that came to me, like I said, mostly from television, because everybody's doing these ensemble things, and it's like, how do you introduce your ensemble? And I'm always like, well, make your pilot about one character, pretty much. You can introduce all the other ones through that character, but try not to make it about like the whole thing. Don't try to do everything all at once.
Yeah.
And with television, you're going to have episodes that focus literally on other characters. So you don't have to do it in the pilot episode,
You
right?
don't have to do it in the pilot. Introduce them in the pilot, tie them into whoever you're talking about, but you don't have to do everything at once.
Focus on them.
Yeah, exactly.
Later. Yeah. Well, that kind of, that kind of is a great segue into good news, bad news, because of what I said earlier to you guys.
Yeah.
Because the good news, bad news technique that I tracked here is literally from the perspective of Peter, who was our first protagonist in the movie, who's our first way in. But just to give, you guys can help me out here.
Yeah.
Good news, bad news technique. We've talked about this before. I think the two episodes that we've talked about this really well, or three actually, is Raiders of the Lost Ark, Solo, and Willow. And all kind of Lucasfilm. This is this is Lawrence Kasdan, if I'm not mistaken. This is like a technique that he perfected, or you guys tell me.
Jamie, did it come from Wordplayer?
Terry
Rossio
been around,
and Ted Elliott.
You know where I remember it, and honestly, it predates this. But is it Dove Simmons? Is that the guy? That book, the guy? How to make a movie for $10?
I just meant what movies it originally was.
Well, that
inspired, like the technique was written by from the movies, and I was like thinking that.
It predates probably anything we've
talked about,
reviewed, like because we've done Solo and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and that guy that I mentioned, he's been around for like 50 years teaching people how to make movies, but he wasn't even the first.
I took his seminar, by the way.
Did you?
He's a lunatic.
Yeah, he's a weird dude.
He's gonna sue me now, but.
But his book has like
he calling him a lunatic.
He talks like this.
Yeah, he calls it
Jurassic Park. How much you really think that's $114 million? That's 5 sets and blah blah. That's a $12 million movie. The rest of it is just to look good.
yeah. He's a guy that gives us like 1 day seminar before you go and make your $50,000 movie.
Did Tarantino take his seminar? Is that where he got big?
I think so. Yeah.
So he wrote down this good news, bad news technique. Is what you're saying?
In his book, he has something. It's like William Martell has his own version. He just calls it reversals. Yeah. I don't think he calls it good news, bad news, but he might. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if that's where I got it from. But I remember Dove's because Dove is like called like oh shit or something. Oh shit! And then all caps. Oh shit!
Is it? Yeah. Well, what's the opposite of oh shit though? So that's bad news. Oh great! Oh shit! Oh great!
Yeah, it's something like that. Like in his book, it's that.
Good news, bad news is so much better than that.
I feel like we don't need to keep talking about its origin, but I feel
we don't
like
need
we've
to.
talked about
We've talked about it.
Ted Elliott, Terry Rosso, is where I feel like you mentioned it coming from, James.
To me personally, it feels like this always reminds me of Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
that's where it comes from. That's that technique, but it's how to write action, how to write an action scene, right, guys? Like that's what you would say,
and
right?
and so we've talked about also in the past how okay, so you know how your scene is going to start. You're sitting at the blank page. You know how your scene is going to begin. You know how it's going to end. And you're stressed about how can I make the time in between interesting and surprising and exciting. And a lot of people just want to make it like the rise, right? It's just like rising, and it ends. And a lot of other people will just kind of keep it flat. But this is a great technique, and it works even in conversations. If you just write like two people sit at a table and like the relationship is over by the end of the conversation in the scene, you write good news, bad news, good news, bad news, good news, bad news, and it's just a conversation at a table. But by the end, you know that the relationship is going to end. You can make this, relationship argument surprising and interesting just by coming up with the good news, bad news, good news, bad news, good news, bad news that ultimately leads to the end of the relationship by the conversation being over. So anyway, it's just a great way.
I was going to say like something that would be the opposite of this. There's been a lot of criticism thrown at like some of the more current movies The Rock has done where he like in his contract, he can't lose fights and he can't get hit and stuff. And that makes the action scenes way more boring for the audience. Like the outcome, the beginning of the scene and the end of the scene is the same, but the middle is still him winning the whole time. So it's not as interesting.
Who wants to watch that? Right.
Yeah. If you can win, if you're winning all the time, it's not. Yeah. It's not engaging.
Where I've seen it, and I've even rewritten scripts, been hired to rewrite scripts. I had this, but it was kind of like the action hero comes in. Imagine a John Wick scene. We kind of talked about it with John Wick.
We did
a little bit. In some ways, John Wick is the bad version of it, but it's executed so good that it's not. And sometimes
it's not something to learn from. Yes.
Yeah. And John Wick has his bad news. Like he will get hurt and stuff like that. And there will be things.
The sequels do good news, bad news better than the first movie does.
There is something about John Wick that's so thrilling to just watch him kick butt that it is okay. But it's execution, it's stuntman dependent and stuff. Because on the page, like the things I've rewritten that I'm like, oh no, this isn't good. It's like guy walks in, 3 bad guys, bang, bang, bang. They're all dead.
That's
Next scene. That's it.
Next scene, right?
It's like, oh, that's not action writing.
Yeah, and the writer thinks, well, like they overcame an obstacle. And they, there was conflict, there was tension, they overcame an obstacle, there's drama there, right? But there's more drama if they don't overcome the obstacle right away. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
it's like bang, bang, bang. Oh no, they're all wearing bulletproof vests. I'm out of bullets.
Yep.
They look at me,
right.
And now what? That's what you want. You want something clever, surprising, more fun, and challenging.
And what this movie does.
Yep.
So I tracked the as what was it 20 minutes in, Jimmy?
18 minutes.
18 minutes in, right. I should have remembered that. 18 minutes in, basically the I'll call it the orb juggling scene.
That's great. The orb juggling scene.
Yeah, and I tracked it from Peter's perspective. So let me burn through this good news, bad news. It's
I'm excited.
Like I said, describing this stuff is weird because it's all in space and they're using gadgets and stuff.
Yeah.
Jamie's actually juggling orbs right now, which nobody can see, but I know it's there. Okay, so let's start. Talk about distracting. Okay, good news. Peter is so confident Gamora isn't a threat, he's juggling the orb without care. Bad news. Gamora snatches the orb easily from his hand, kicks him in the gut, and runs off.
Oh, man.
Good news. Peter throws a laser-powered boladero, that's what I'm calling it, that wraps around Gamora's legs, tripping her. Bad news. Gamora easily takes off the boladera and again kicks a leaping Peter midair, then proceeds to immediately punch him in the face and dick while simultaneously stopping him from grabbing his gun. She pulls out her blade to go for the kill, and good news. Rocket Raccoon smashes into Gamora, pulling her off Peter. As Rocket screams to Groot to put him in the bag, Groot wrongly starts putting Gamora in his bag, while Peter once again grabs the orb and runs. Bad news. Gamora overpowers Rocket, tossing him off the bridge they're on, and throws a knife with perfect precision at Peter's hand, knocking the orb free from his grasp. The orb falls off the walkway onto the lower level courtyard. Gamora leaps down with ease, sees the orb on the ground, and grabs it. Good news. Peter leaps off the walkway, falling directly on Gamora. Bad news. Gamora, being way stronger than Peter, instantly incapacitates him with her knee. Good news. Peter grabs the orb back, then slaps a tiny rocket from his belt onto Gamora's hip and ignites it. She flies hundreds of feet away right into a fountain. Bad news. Groot puts a bag over Peter's head and flings him over his shoulder, which is just enough time for Gamora to be right next to them, brandishing her sword. Good news. Rocket poses no threat to Gamora, and Groot is distracted as she cuts off his limbs and stabs him. She goes for the bag, and Peter pops out and electrocutes her with one of his gadgets. He's free to run off. Bad news. Rocket has a really big gun. He shoots Peter, electrocuting him to the ground, and then the Nova Corps shows up and arrests all 4 of them. Good news. Sort of. John C. Reilly recognizes Peter as Star Prince, takes it easy on him as they arrest him away.
Oh man, that was
That's
so good.
everything.
That might have been my favorite one, Bob.
Yeah.
But so
yeah,
as you
that's
can
everything.
see how exciting that is, right? And how it makes it surprising. And oh man, that's a great example.
And it also, I
technique.
think, as far we were talking about exposition, it shows like kind of the power set of everybody too. At early on in the movie, like you can see Gamora is like objectively stronger than Peter.
About them, yes.
Peter's weapon, Peter's gadgets, his kind of like space Batman gadgets and stuff come
Space
into play.
Batman is a great way to describe
Rocket
it.
loves guns, and Groot you can cut off his limbs, and it really doesn't matter that much. Like it tells us so much. It's better than them just getting arrested. If they just got arrested, it'd be nothing. Like Jamie said, it's like
and honestly, that's what I would see. Like in some scripts, it'd be like they come in, they have a Mexican standoff or something. They all kind of aim weapons at each other, and the police come in the end.
That's it.
That's
it would but this is like an almost 10-minute sequence.
I mean, how many beats is that, Bob? Is it hard to count that many?
3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Lucky 13.
So you got
that I picked out. The person that picks them out could do it different, but that's what I got.
What I'm saying is like that's not that much work. Like
no, it's not.
It's worth workshopping it to make it so that your action or your dialogue or that your scenes have this type of flow. Yeah.
But I think like I said, my main takeaway is you can tell story and character within these things.
Within this. Yes.
Right? Yes. You learn about Gamora's savagery.
Yes.
Like she was ready to kill Peter without a second. He would be dead if Rocket didn't hit her. Yeah. That would be the end of Star-Lord right there. You can tell story within the whole action. It's not just a car chase. It's not just that. So
thanks, Bob. That was awesome.
Yep. Next is untrustworthy allies.
Yeah, so I just wanted to keep this quick. I don't have much. It was just a discussion I wanted to bring up real quick, and you guys can bounce off if you have anything additional to say. Jamie, I'm sure you have experienced this too. I break out the bingo cards. I read amateur scripts 5 days a week.
It tracks, man. It tracks.
One thing I don't talk about very often is I read scripts where everybody gets along, like to a fault.
Right.
And so like my note is this is too pleasant. Like it's like I am all for a good time, right? Like a feel good movie. But even feel good movies, people need to not get along. People need to have disagreements and low key conflict between them. Like if the worst thing for your script is if your characters all get along. Like that is the death of conflict and tension. And I read scripts all the time where it's like there's 4 people in the scene and all 4 of them are buds. And like everything is great. Like And yeah, there might be some fun dialogue and some interesting stuff happening, but there's no conflict because everybody's cool with each other. And so
not everything can be Bill and Ted, you know.
Right. But everybody else doesn't get along with Bill and Ted.
That's
right. Problem. Yeah. So,
I know, I'm joking.
I know what you mean. But I didn't break down the examples of how the untrustworthy allies are executed in the script to create this conflict and tension. But if anyone's interested in the Willow episode, we went through the entire script and noted every time where the supposed ally then got another one of the characters in trouble because they're untrustworthy. And if you can create, like, force your hero to team up with people and force them to place their trust in other characters who have been established as untrustworthy threats, like ticking time bombs of their own, that is instantly going to be a recipe for conflict and tension in every scenario that you put your characters in, because we know that they don't trust each other, and there's this instant organic tension built in if you can create characters that are untrustworthy allies with each other. So, and I think that Guardians of the Galaxy, one of the strengths of the team is that they are, you know, when we initially meet them, like this probably isn't the case in 2 and 3 as much because they've bonded, but like they are each other's worst enemy, basically, even though they're working together. Like
it's still prevalent in 2. I haven't seen 3, but like Rocket and Peter literally are arguing while they're in like a space battle,
right?
Like,
and it just creates it's like a relationship bomb under the table. Right. It's that bomb under the table. Like, when is this person who I don't trust going to betray my character in the situation because of their own problems, you know? So yeah, this is
also, I think it makes it more relatable and real.
It's
honestly,
real, right?
People you love are not always people you get along with,
right?
You know?
Right. So please, if you're looking at your script right now, if I'm striking a chord and you're like, oh shit, are my characters getting along too well? I think maybe you should take a hard look at their relationships and see if you can adjust it so that they're more in contrast with each other and there's more internal tension. So,
yeah, everyone here is kind of like a pirate.
Yeah.
They're like all angry pirates,
space pirates,
you know?
Yeah.
They're space pirates. Yeah.
Basically,
so, yeah. So they're not going to get along. Giving your characters distinct voices.
Yeah, so I just bounce off of this, and Jamie, if you have anything, please interrupt, but or interject. Another thing that I read a lot is characters where everyone sounds the same. I call it writer's voice versus character's voice, because like my note will be like, I only hear you, I don't hear the character. And when the danger of not taking the time to workshop your characters' voices so they all have distinct ways of speaking, is that everyone sounds the same, and so like then you don't have a character, you just have the writer's voice. So like there's a couple quick things to think about when you're thinking about your character's voice, and then I'll talk about each of the Guardians, because I think Guardians of the Galaxy is really instructive in the power of contrasting voices. Like, where do your characters come from, right? Each of these voices are informed by the backgrounds of the Guardians, right? What are their culture's morals and values, right? Like Peter is American, so he's got American values, right? Like
he's a 1980s American.
Yeah, so
he's
like,
a Ronald Reagan American.
Yeah, so like whereas like Drax, like, you know, like they kill without thinking, you know, like his people are shown to kill without thinking. So that's going to inform their voice. What is their vocabulary? And this is like, again, all of these. So I'll just go into them. Like you said, Peter is an American Earthling from the 80s, right? He's like, I come from Earth, a planet of outlaws. Billy the Kid, Bonnie Clyde, John Stamos. He's using pop culture references like, hey, get off of me. Like, you know, he's talking about Footloose and Kevin Bacon and blah, blah. And then you have Gamora, who's a warrior, but she's like an intergalactic royalty, right? She's like the daughter of Thanos. So she's dignified. She's regal. Everything she says, I call it regal speak. She speaks like she's a queen. You know, she has this dignified way of delivering, even when she's like doing her, you know, post-vanquishing lines and all of her badass moments. There's still this regal speak to it, right?
To quote Tommy Lee Jones, she's not sanctioning their buffoonery.
That's good. Like, I have a line from her. She says, "You have the bearing of a man of honor." Like, that's what a dignified person says, right? And then you have Drax, who's like speaks literal to a comedic extreme. Nothing will go over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I will catch it. And then you have Groot, who only can say 3 words in the same order.
Right.
And then you have Rocket, who's crass and abrasive to an extreme. And everything he says is crass and abrasive to an extreme. So you contrast that with Peter, who's like, always like, chill out, man, everything's cool. You got the crass and abrasive.
He's like
chill out, everything's cool.
Angry little Napoleon character.
Yes.
You know?
So that combination of those 5 dramatically distinct voices that are all born out of like their backgrounds and where they come from I think it's a great example. It's why the characters can keep having movies together, because like you just give them 5 voices and temperaments that are that dramatically in contrast with each other, and you can put them in any scene and it instantly is interesting just knowing how they talk, right? Like, and so just work.
And you literally have Groot be like 3 different characters throughout the movies, right? Like,
that he's a teenage
keeps growing,
version.
teenager,
And he's doing the teenage version of I Am Groot. Yes,
right.
But just something to keep in mind when you're writing is like, it sounds so obvious, but it is like such a common problem. Like,
I actually find this is a hard thing to do and a hard thing to teach.
Yes,
because everything you said is true, but then there's a question of how you do it.
Yeah,
how you figure it out. You know what I mean? And so that's the next level of this. And when people ask me, I don't have a lot of good answers. I'll tell you the answers I give them, because they're the ones I try to use when I get stuck in this myself. I try to find handles for them. Like, Quill's the Han Solo of the group. Rocket talks like a New York City cab driver. You know, whatever it is. You know, I try to find like little handles just in my head, like to characterize them. Like, I think I came up with something for the workbook. I can't remember if I did this for the workbook or not, if it made it in the end. I can't remember if I edited it out. But I was almost coming up with this meets this. Han Solo meets Ferris Bueller.
That's really good.
Like, so I started to do that. That was my thing, to break them out. And then,
so you're talking like shortcuts to get to the voice.
Shortcuts to get to the voice. You know, Han Solo meets Ferris Bueller. What is that? I don't know what it is.
Gamora, Princess Leia meets Conan the Barbarian. You know, something like that, right?
Exactly.
That's her.
And it would give me something. And then on the last step I do, and some people say this is the completely wrong step, is I'd say this meets this, starring this person. So I'd be like, it's Han Solo meets Ferris Bueller starring Jack Black. And that would give me something.
There, I mean, I'd be somewhere. You can just bubble play with that,
Or even, knowing me, it would be Han Solo meets Ferris Bueller, and it'd be Danny McBride. That's what it would.
This meets that is good. You've
that's
put,
not bad.
That's totally who it would.
You've put words to something I've done, and I never put words to it. Yes, that is good.
And honestly, mine would be Han Solo meets Danny McBride, like 9 times out of 10, and that would be enough. You know, I get
like
that.
The Jamie voice, signature.
I know it's always Danny McBride.
Danny McBride.
He shows up in everything, because I don't know why, I just love his voice. But
that's honestly what Marvel's missing, is Danny McBride.
Yeah. So it
if he was Thanos, it would be the greatest thing that ever happened.
How would Danny McBride say, "I am inevitable"?
We'll be here for hours. There's so many different ways. But
that's good. But
it's a good technique.
You know, it's something. If it feels like it often gets forgotten, that the power of giving each of your characters voices, like completely different voices and temperaments, you know, in contrast to each other, it's just it makes your script crackle. when you can find it. So Jamie, that's good. This meets that starring this.
Yeah. It's
Groot,
sometimes my this meets this is just this starring this. It's like Han Solo starring Dave McBride.
Even two of those will get you to something interesting.
Two can get you there.
Yeah.
Two can get you there.
I was trying to think of a Groot, and I was like, Big Bird crossed with the Thing from Fantastic Four, not John Carpenter's Thing.
I was gonna say like
Silent Bob meets the Treebeard. No,
Rocket. I was like,
that's not bad. Silent Bob and
is like Oscar the Grouch meets who?
Bradley Cooper. No, I'm just kidding.
Napoleon.
Yeah, Oscar the Grouch meets Napoleon.
He's kind of like a tactical genius, but he's also short and he feels the world owes him something.
That's good.
And he's been tortured his whole life for it.
But I could totally see Rocket like living in a trash can.
Yeah, no, that's not
and
bad.
Popping out and being like,
honestly, you could probably do most of these characters with a Muppet variant.
Yeah.
Like there is a Jim Henson-y thing to this.
Yeah, the Muppet variant. Which Muppet? The Muppet. That's good.
Yeah. Which Muppet does it remind you of?
Yeah. Muppet plus this equals new voice.
Right.
You could kind of see, like, if you're breaking the story, where you could take the tropes of Star Wars and just like mix them up.
Totally. Totally.
Like you could just and do whatever the meats is what the new spin would be.
I think Bob saying Gamora is Princess Leia meets Conan the Barbarian. That captures it so well.
It's
yeah.
Giving the spin. Yeah.
Okay, our last topic, which I think is kind of like the movie itself, which is the not so secret weapons.
Yeah. So we have done this topic to death. It's funny. I'm always surprised how few times we cover a topic that feels like we've covered it ad nauseum. Like I'll look back and I'll be like, oh, we've only actually done this 4 times in the history of the show. But this one, we've done it at least a dozen times, and all recently. So I'm not going to go much into the concept of the not so secret weapon, but it's basically like this buried Chekhov's gun, the Chekhov's gun, that is inevitably going to be the tactic that the hero uses to save the day. And but there's an extra part to that I like to talk about that I give my clients, that I call the MacGyver exercise. And for context, just like I'm talking about characters who all sound the same, just like I'm talking about action scenes that, just like Jamie said, the guy walks in, shoots the 3 bad guys and walks out.
Yeah.
I am reading scripts where there is no crossing of the streams. There is no Loader and Alien. There is no Arnold covering himself with mud to defeat the Predator. Instead, the hero is using some really generic tactic that anybody would use to get out of the situation. So, Jamie, before I go into it, let's see if I can jog your brain. You have talked about this reference of every character is going to handle a situation like so different. If you're doing your job right, you can create a character who you can instantly know based on learning how they handled the situation, who that character is. You talked about how James Bond will enter a situation and get through it in a way that only James Bond would, right?
Right. In the one I always give example, like I'll put 3 people up. I'll say James Bond, Batman, and SpongeBob.
Yes, that's it. I gotta remember this. This is
talk about
good.
Distinct voices.
Yeah, yes. They're all in the same scenario. Like there's a person, they have to get through a door. And how do they get through that door? James Bond might seduce the person at the door or something like that. Who knows? But he'll charm his way in. Batman might punch his way in, like he did in whatever the last Batman movie was. And then SpongeBob, who knows? He's the wild card, right? So all those characters, they're easy to. The reason I use them is because they're all very distinct. But your character should be sort of distinct in a similar kind of way. Like, how would they do it?
How are they going to get themselves, using what's unique and special about them and the scenario and the premise, how are they going to MacGyver themselves out of the situation? So this one, it's interesting because the not so secret
two,
weapon
right?
has really three examples of using the same tactic in different ways. Like, it's a premise pretzel, which I don't want to go into another term, but it's so I can already find three. Maybe I'm even missing one. In the opening, Peter uses music and dancing to distract himself from the situation, and he's able to achieve the goal and acquire the orb because he's using music and dance to distract himself. So the ending is a reversal of that. But there's a second one. He's using music and dance in that exposition scene with the I share, you share. He's using music and dance as a seduction tactic, right? He's doing the same thing. It's his James Bond move, right? Like his MacGyver move is using music and dance to navigate the situation and like try to achieve what he's trying to achieve. But yeah, the reversal, the reason I wanted to bring it up, because it is our classic not so secret weapon, but it unlike other movies we've talked about, like they don't cross the streams multiple times in Ghostbusters. They only do it once at the end, right? This is one where we sort of see him use it a couple times, so it's really not so secret. But
it's innately not dangerous either. You can do it whenever.
Right.
You know, like crossing the streams, they have, it's like
exactly. Yeah. You can do it whenever, but it's one of my favorites. That's why, even though we've talked about it a lot, I wanted to talk about this. Is a great example of the not so secret weapon. He like uses the music and dancing to distract Ronan long enough for, and then they even say, "What are you doing? I'm distracting you, big turd blossom." So anyway, it's just a great example of how Peter MacGyvered himself out of the situation, is using what's unique and special to Peter, and he's doing it in a way that he's using what he has, which is nothing except his love for music and dance. In the situation, they literally are completely outgunned. They have nothing to defend themselves with, or Peter has nothing to defend himself. This is all he can do to MacGyver himself out of the situation.
You could also argue it's slightly humor too.
Oh,
like
yeah,
humor is
yeah. So anyway,
I said that earlier.
I like to challenge when I'm reading a script where the big move, the big climactic tactic to overcome the situation is generic, and been there, seen that 1,000 times.
I was going to say, like, what I love about this movie is it's basically subverting the thing you're saying.
Yes.
Because Rocket creates that weapon, which they threatened earlier, that would blow up the entire ship. And then they hit Ronan with it. And that, in a normal script, a work script, would be the thing that blows Ronan up.
That's the Death Star explosion, yes.
Right. It does nothing. So then it's a fake out, not so secret weapon.
That's good.
And then, that's why
that's good. Yeah.
And when I looked at this last night, and when I saw that, I was like, that's what I find impressive about that movie.
Yeah,
really,
it does subvert it in that way. You think it's going to be the bit, but anyway, if think about how your character is getting, what's your character's MacGyver move? You know, like we've talked about it a couple times. We in Get Out, Chris uses the cotton in the chair to plug his ears to keep from getting brainwashed. In Pig, Nicolas Cage's chef character cooks a 3-course meal to get himself out of the situation with the mobster.
In MacGruber, his MacGyver move is to be MacGyver.
That's
all. Not about, since we're wrapping up or near it, I have to talk about MacGyver super quick.
Okay.
So I remember watching the show MacGyver on the first night it started in the pilot episode. Okay. And the thing everybody remembers about MacGyver is doing these crazy chemical bombs out of things and stuff. And you couldn't really understand him. It was kind of like you almost could write science explosion. But the pilot episode of MacGyver grabbed my attention so much, even back then, as storytelling, because you had a guy, if I'm remembering this right, and honestly, I watched it one time and never watched it again, but I remember it to this day.
It's like 40 years ago, right?
Yeah, I think in the pilot episode, there's a little opening Indiana Jones kind of teaser, right? Which instantly got me interested. And he has a map of some kind, or maybe he's stealing the map. I can't remember what it was, but the door's locked. So he uses the map in 5 different ways. So it's not chemicals or science at all. And this is what impressed me. So first, the door's locked. I think he pushes the key and slides the map under the door to get the key out from the other side. So he uses the map just as like a little
blanket. Yeah.
So he does that. He hits somebody with it and has a metal bar in it or something like that. He does that later, right? Then he uses it. He's in the desert. He uses it as a toboggan. So that's his next thing. And then he escapes on a balloon and they shoot the balloon. I think he uses it as a patch for the balloon. And I was like, this is the greatest show ever, if I'm remembering it right. It was never as good, because then it just became like, I'm going to take a battery and do a thing. But that first 5 minutes, whoever wrote that is to me William Shakespeare. That's my MacGyver film. I was like, even my little storytelling as a kid, my mind was blown. I was like, I want to be that good one day and come up with 5 ways to use a map, in one scene.
If I ever put this in a book, I'm gonna find that opening scene and reference it specifically. It's
probably on YouTube.
Dude.
Probably, yeah.
I'm probably like completely wrong. That's probably not even there. I probably made it up or something. But I'm pretty sure. Like I wasn't a big fan of the show because the show did become just Mr. Wizard,
gotcha.
Like stuff I couldn't do. Now, if I was MacGyver, I could figure out how to slide a map on her thing or use it as a patch or a toboggan. So it's things like that were clever to me. Like if I was
relatably clever.
It makes
relatably clever.
It makes me think of the pile of junk in Apollo 13 that they then have to put together and come up with a way to get more air and oxygen and with that pile of junk,
and I think you're better, and this has nothing to do with Guardians of the Galaxy. This is your bonus tip for the day. I think you're better off if, like in Apollo 13, you can tell us what the problem is so we can play along and we can kind of try to figure out how to use that pile of junk. So then when we see how they do it, we're like, if we were really smart, we could have done that.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway.
We never did Apollo 13.
No, great.
I think
we can fix that one day.
I think Star Trek works that way too. Like when they have their space battles, like if you could kind of lay out like the simplicity of it, and then when Kirk comes up with some crazy trick, we're like, if I was only as smart as him.
Jamie, I think that's always been the reason I prefer the original series, because the original series did it in a way that I understand it.
Right.
And I love the later Star Trek, but Star Trek gets more complex and technical and saying things.
Yeah.
It's more geeky. It's fine. It's just more geeky and it's less relatable in that way.
It's almost like they have to establish like what the metaphor is in our world, and then solve it that way or something. But again, make it relatable in some way.
Right.
But back to the dance, challenging Ronan to a dance off is so Peter. It's a way to get out of the situation that only Peter would do, and I love it for that. And I think that's
it's full circle from the opening.
Yeah. If you can figure out a way to make your characters choices and tactics so specific and unique to them, then it's going to lead to a memorable climax like that. Yeah.
Right.
Totally agree. And I think that the way this movie sticks the landing is the reason for that box office.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, like I really do. I really think like stuff like that is the reason it really shines.
Agreed.
But yeah, that's everything for Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes.
On the day of the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Do you guys have anything else you need to plug? Want to say anything?
I will just say I am my script consultant website. I think you put a tag on it after we were done.
I did. I have a recorded
no, that's
thing,
okay. But
I always plug my stuff too.
It's scriptbutcher.com. We are recording this on May 5th, 2023. I am booked through mid-August. So what is it? September, October, November, December. So I only have 4 months of spots left in the year. So if you want to, hire me to do notes on your script, head to scriptbutcher.com and send me an email.
Cool. Jamie, anything?
I don't think I have anything.
Okay. You want to describe MacGyver episode 2? No,
I don't think I watched it. No, I think I probably did watch it.
Here comes another box office list.
Yeah. The top 10 TV shows when MacGyver came out.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll just say, yeah, if you like the show and you want to help us, share it, leave an Apple Podcast review. If you want to keep the show ad-free and just support me, patreon.com/BobRoseSucks. And I think that's everything, guys.
Yeah, I will say we are getting some reviews. So thank you to the people who have taken the time to send us Apple reviews, because it is helping. We are getting some momentum with the show. We're growing, which is awesome. And a big part of that is because people are taking the time to leave those reviews. So thank you.
And people who share, like on Twitter and stuff.
It helps. It helps.
It does.
Yeah, that's like the biggest thing, really, just letting other people know we exist.
So thank you to
even
everyone.
A little passive retweet goes a long way.
Passive retweet is the best. Retweet. It's like it's like donating $1 to the Kickstarter, right?
I accidentally press retweet. Oops.
You don't even have to. You don't have to write anything. Just click.
Exactly.
It's great.
Just let us do it. It's fine.
Anyway,
all right.
Thanks
guys,
for listening,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.